In order for a war to be successful, from my position, and I'm coming as a person of faith, uh, and also I think as someone who tries to be a good human being, in order for a war to be successful, it would have to be successful for everybody. It would have to make life better for people on both sides. So it's not just punishing somebody, and it's actually healing, bringing goodness where there was evil. And I don't think war ever works that way.
Welcome back to War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. My guest today, Ben Daniel, is a Presbyterian pastor and the author of Grace Over Guns, Pursuing Peace in a Militarized World. It's an excellent book that spans centuries and continents, from Costa Rica to Andorra, from a really important perspective. While warmongers ostensibly read the same holy books as peacemakers, they come to completely different conclusions, and it's crucial to go back to the source. So thank you. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm a I'm a fan of your podcast, so it's a thrill for me to be here as a guest.
I'm so grateful. You've heard the podcast. We've had rabbis, but you are the first pastor. So I'm really
An honor.
excited. What is grace? Tell me about the theologic origins.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Grace is it's a concept that Christians, particularly Protestant Christians, like to talk a lot about. You know, our kind of most famous hymn that we share in Protestant America is Amazing Grace. And mostly when Protestants talk about grace, we talk about the goodness of God, which comes to us when we don't deserve it. And particularly, especially for evangelicals, this would have something to do with our salvation. We're saved even though we don't deserve it. And that's probably true, but there's more to grace than that. Grace is rooted in Hellenistic. It's a Hellenistic philosophical concept, uh, Stoic in origin, but particularly developed by Philo of Alexandria, who was a Jewish Stoic. And it is a concept that grace is the way in which, or the means by which, God empowers us to live righteous lives. So grace is God's power at work in us to make us better people. And what's wonderful about grace is it is the Greek word used for grace, charis, is similar to the Greek word for joy, similar to the Greek word for gratitude, which is why in Spanish, gracias is feminine plural for grace, and grazie is feminine plural in Italian for grace. And when we say a prayer of thanksgiving around the table, we call it grace. This doesn't mean that we're contemplating deep philosophical subjects when we express gratitude, but I think that the word preserves some of the joy, some of the goodness that's inherent in the concept of grace.
And how does that manifest in foreign policy, or should it?
Well, I think it really should. I think that when we allow God, and if you're not a believer, you could just say when we allow our better selves or the general goodness of the universe to be alive in us, then grace is moving in us. And when we're allowing that to happen, we can see past the kinds of reactions and the kinds of beliefs and the kinds of violence that moves in us that leads us to war. When we allow grace to be in us, we can maybe look at some important truths about ourselves and about the world, which I hope will lead us to a more peaceful attitude in the world. And so I think that there's a lot of people who would say, well, we can't stop fighting. War is inherent to the human experience. And I would say that grace can change that, that the goodness of God or the goodness of the universe, the goodness of humanity can move us past our need to fight with each other. In the same way, I think grace in the world moved us past our belief that it was okay to enslave each other. It moved us past our belief that women should only stay at home and have sort of domestic duties in life. Um, so I think grace has been alive in the world in lots of ways, even politically, and grace can be, and I hope will be alive in us as we perhaps build a world that moves us beyond war.
Yes, you write explicitly about war's track record and say
Mhm.
no nonviolent movement or act of nonviolent resistance has failed quite as spectacularly as has military violence. Military violence is, in addition to being a moral atrocity, in terms of accomplishing its political goals, does it?
Well, it doesn't. It mostly does not. I mean, I suppose the minute I say war never works, someone's going to come up with some obscure war that did work, right?
Mhm.
And so I want to say mostly it doesn't. It seldom, if ever, works. Um, and when I talk about the success of war, in order for a war to be successful from my position, and I'm coming as a person of faith, and also I think as someone who tries to be a good human being, in order for a war to be successful, it would have to be successful for everybody. It would have to make life better for people on both sides. So it's not just punishing somebody, and it's not. It's actually healing, bringing goodness where there was evil. And I don't think war ever works that way. The other thing that war would have to do to be successful is it would have to end the violence. It would have to lead us to a place where there was uh, well-being everywhere, that everybody was sharing well-being, whether that's the enemy or the people on our side. And war just doesn't do that. War only ever leads to more violence, or if it doesn't lead to more violence, it's because one side has been so completely destroyed in the war that it can't fight back again.
Yes, the book explicitly anticipates the what about World War II
Yes.
questions. Tell us about your trip to Japan, particularly the 26 martyrs of Nagasaki. I had never heard that story before.
Yeah. So I went to Japan. World War II, of course, is the biggest issue that anybody in the United States who's a pacifist has to deal with because there is evil in the world, and evil was incarnate there, particularly in the person of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi movement. But we didn't just fight in Europe; we fought also in Japan, and the war lasted longer in Japan for the United States than it did in Europe. And I wanted to go to Nagasaki primarily because Nagasaki is it's the place where the war really started to wind down with the dropping of the plutonium bomb, the second nuclear weapon. And it's also a place that is being forgotten about. When we talk about the nuclear attacks on Japan, we often just talk about Hiroshima. And a lot of people travel to Japan and visit Hiroshima. I mean, not nobody, few people go to Nagasaki. So I wanted to go to Nagasaki. And Nagasaki is particularly interesting to me because, well, for one thing, I'm married to an opera singer, and Madama Butterfly was
Oh,
set there.
awesome.
So, but also, and this actually is part of the opera, Madama Butterfly. That Nagasaki a was the largest Christian enclave in Japan. It still is. It was the one place where um, the Japanese emperors allowed trade with the West, and so there was some Christianity that showed up there. And at the end of the 15th century, there were a group of Jesuits who some were Japanese, some were from other parts of the world. 26 of them were martyred in Japan, and it has always been the uh, the response of Japanese Christians not to fight back. Japanese Roman Catholics not to fight back, and that was demonstrated in the martyrdom of these Jesuits, lay and religious Jesuits who were martyred. Uh, when they were martyred, they didn't put up a fight, and that has been true of Japanese Christianity, or at least Japanese Catholicism in Nagasaki since then. The feeling is among the Japanese Christians in Nagasaki is that their sort of their nonviolent response to oppression helped guide the people of Nagasaki as they responded to the bomb that was dropped on them, that they responded not with grievance, but with grief, and with not with the desire to get back at those who harmed them, but it is with the desire to make the world a more peaceful place. And that I found to be profoundly inspirational. And I didn't know anything about that. I only vaguely knew about the martyrs of Nagasaki, but I didn't know anything about the 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 response of Nagasaki, which was driven in large part by the Roman Catholic community there. And I thought it was really beautiful. Uh, One of the things I read about in the book is I also went to Hiroshima. My brother and I were traveling together. We also went to Hiroshima, and in both places, but in Nagasaki and in Hiroshima, there were two important things being communicated. One was we need to make sure that nobody ever drops another bomb again, and we need to remember the victims. And those are both really important messages, I think. In Nagasaki, trying to prevent or trying to end nuclear wars was more important than remembering the victims, though the victims were certainly remembered and memorialized. In Hiroshima, it was exactly the opposite. It was put the victims front and center, and oh, by the way, we need to um, try to end world, end nuclear weapons in the world. So I resonated with the messaging of the memorials in Nagasaki more. I definitely think it's important to remember those uh, whose lives were lost. It's important to remember those who lost loved ones and continue to grieve. Um, and I don't want to in any way downplay that work because it's important work. The most important takeaway from that work, though, in my opinion, is we need to make sure this never happens again. And the memorials in Nagasaki, the museum in Nagasaki, the whole approach to remembering uh, the bomb that was dropped in Nagasaki is all about nuclear disarmament. That's the primary thing. And I wanted to see more of that in Hiroshima and didn't.
Yeah, we're lucky. If they wanted revenge, God knows how many what would have happened. You mentioned your wife being an opera singer, which is an interesting seg. It brings me to Estonia.
Yes.
I'd love to talk about alternatives to war, so people don't realize that they do in fact exist, and some of them are even musical.
Yes, well, Estonia is a great story because the people of Estonia, their national identity, a lot of their cultural identity is rooted in singing choral music, and so soon after the Soviet Union took over Estonia at the end of the Second World War, they started singing Estonian music because the Soviets wanted to make sure that the Estonians only sang Russian music in the Russian language and music that celebrated Soviet communism. So they did that. But over the years, they have these massive musical events, massive musical gatherings called Lalu, easy for me to say, Lalupidu. The Lalupidos happen, I think, every 5 years, roughly. And they would happen, the first ones after World War II, all celebrated communism and the music was in Russian. But soon thereafter, they started slipping in more and more Estonian. And that solidified Estonian identity in the face of communism. And when communism started to started to crumble in the Soviet Union, the way the way that the Estonians kind of solidified their independence was by singing and refusing to stop singing, which is wonderful. Uh, that wouldn't have happened during another period of Soviet history, but at that moment during Glasnost and Perestroika, they could have picked up arms and fought their way to freedom, but they didn't. They started singing, and they kept singing, and they sang until they had their independence, which is lovely. So it's a wonderful story. My wife went, and to this day they're still singing and celebrating their independence. They've had their independence longer than at any time in the last, I don't know, 500 years
Wow.
through their singing. And when my wife went, there were 30,000 people singing in this choir and 100,000 people in attendance and also singing. So it was just this great big festival of song, and it was sounds really wonderful. I'm glad she got to go.
I love the idea of musical subterfuge. Theater kids have a role to play in making a better world.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things about it, which is great, is that one of the reasons that the choirs are credited with bringing about this independence was that they're also organized, right? You got to like someone's got to have a phone tree to call people up and say, hey, that we got to rehearse or the rehearsal's canceled. So they're all really organized. And theater's the same way.
Yeah.
All these arts groups, they're all organized because you have to organize in order to make it happen. You got to bring people together. So when it came time to say, hey, we're all going down to the choir grounds to sing together, they had their phone tree. They called everybody. Everybody showed up. It's really cool. It's I love the fact that arts and organizations can be places of revolution. It's wonderful.
Yes, the book has also some excellent turns of phrase, and I particularly appreciate was when you described nations as clinging to military violence as a security blanket against the night terrors of a world that seems dangerous and indeed often is. What is it about violence that ironically makes people feel safer? Is it that it's happening to other people? Schadenfreude?
Yeah, that's a good question. The we look for we want help. We want security. We want strength. And I think far too many of us define comfort, define strength, define our help as being. We look for that in violence. Why is that? I don't know why that is. Reaching back to my Calvinist roots, I would say it's part of our fallen nature.
Mm.
Uh, but it's also it's what has been given to us. It's what has been communicated to us as an option. We don't tell stories about Estonia. What I write also about Costa Rica. Um, Costa Rica is a country without a military, and when the United States built military bases in Costa Rica for the Nicaraguan Contras, an invasion of Costa Ricans' territory. It was an affront to their sovereignty, and they didn't have a military. They couldn't do anything about it. So their president, Oscar Arias, got together with all of the other presidents of Central America, and they came up with a peace plan that didn't involve the United States, the Soviet Union, or Cuba, which was brilliant. Um, but we don't tell that story. In fact, it's a good thing I speak Spanish because in order to learn about it, in order to read scholarly articles and journal articles about the Esquipulas Accords, I had to read them in Spanish. They're not a lot of scholarly work about that process has happened in English, and there's just not. I mean, you can look at Wikipedia, but there's just not a lot of really good resources teaching us about peaceful solutions to conflict. I think that's part of the problem. It's just not out there for people to learn about, and so that's one of the reasons I wrote the book.
You write that the Jewish and Christian holy books are, among other things, a record of the violence of ancient empires written by the victims of that violence, which was a fascinating description. So, who are the empires of the Bible, and how do they compare to the empires of today?
So the empires of the Bible, I suppose it depends which scholars you talk to, but the empires described would be the Egyptian Empire, the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and the Roman Empire all show up, plus some smaller territorial expansions, including some led by Israel and also groups like the Hittites, and just to a certain I'm forgetting the other name. That's okay. It's a group of different empires that rise and fall. And what they what they have in common with modern empires is that every empire survives on on violence and exploitation and subjugation. And that's just because empires are super expensive. It's not a wise financial decision to make an empire. So in order to get the resources necessary to sustain the empire, you have to conquer more territory. You have to subjugate more people in the conquered areas, and you have to exploit their resources, whether that's human resources or material resources. That's just what has to happen in order for an empire to exist. And that's true for the United States empire. It's true for every empire. Especially at the edges of empire, the edges of empire are places of great exploitation and subjugation.
And so who was Jesus in history? How did he go up against empire?
Yeah, Jesus, Jesus' ministry involved letting people know they didn't have to be defined by violence of empire, among other things. But um, I'm particularly attracted to people who read in the Jesus story a refusal to participate in the violence of empire, refusal to participate religiously, refusal to even to participate economically. And there was a great scene in the Bible. It's the scene that Christians celebrate the week before Easter. It's called Palm Sunday. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Jesus and his followers march into Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, and when they do, they wave palm fronds and people celebrate. Here comes Jesus, the King, and and the local people in Jerusalem, the religious and political leaders in Jerusalem are like, because they don't want the Romans to get pissed. And because it's a very real concern. A few decades later, that kind of rebellious attitude or the rebellion that Jewish people put up against the Romans ended tragically for Jerusalem and elsewhere. So it was a very real concern. But some scholars that I like have written a book where they talk about Jesus coming in, mocking the empire, while the Roman Empire, it's the start of Passover. So at the beginning of Passover, the Roman, uh, the local Roman governor would always show up with his army to make sure that nobody was inspired by the story of the Exodus from Egypt to start a rebellion. And so the Romans would show up with their army, military force, and Jesus, without any kind of arms or any kind of violence, starts making fun of the Romans. Not not to fight them, but just to tell people we don't have to live under this control. Our souls can be free, our persons can be free, even if our country can't. Um, and I love that because I know now I can't escape militarism. Every every dollar I spend on groceries gets taxed, and some of it's going to go to fund the war in Iran. Everything. It's impossible to get away, but I don't have to be defined by it. I'm an unwilling participant in the violence of empire, but I don't have to let that define who I am in my deepest soul. And that's kind of what I get at it. That's what I'm learning from Jesus as a Christian pastor.
I'd love to hear more about your work as a pastor, especially as someone who presides over funerals and mourning rituals. Like, how does that affect when you're reading about casualties in the news? Would you say that your experiences as a pastor have informed your politics by virtue of, celebrating the divine in every human?
That's a great question, and nobody's asked me that question
Ooh.
before. So thank you. I love it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
One of the things uh, about funerals is that I love doing funerals, and I know that sounds really strange. Some funerals are really difficult. Some funerals, there's been a great tragedy, and at some funerals, there's just a lot of, uh, despite the tears, there's a great deal of happiness. Grandma lived to be 95, and she had a great life, and she died happy. So there's a wide range of feelings at funerals, but what I witness in the funerals, whether I'm remembering the life of the person who's deceased or I'm with the family as they remember, um, the tenderness and the sacredness of each human life, the sacredness of love that is shared in a family, even when it's difficult love, it's still sacred. Um, and and when I think about uh, when we're bombing people, we're killing people, we are violating that holiness that is present in everybody's life. And we're also creating a lot of really tragic funerals. The tragic funerals are gut wrenching, and no one should have to do them. I have done a funerals for children on a couple of occasions.
Oh,
Um,
devastating.
it's devastating. It's important work, and it's such an honor to be there, but it's nothing I ever want to do again. And I think about, thanks to American bombs, we created, was it 165 funerals for girls in a school a couple months ago when we dropped bombs. That happens all the time because it is the nature of military violence. Regardless of what any leader says, it is the nature of military violence to inflict pain on civilians. That always happens. There's no getting around it. Our weapons are designed to create as much destruction as possible, and we are destroying civilians. And we've been doing this certainly since World War II, probably before that. Well, I'm sure it was before that. I mean, I think even going back to when wars meant people facing off with, bows and arrows and swords and lances and stuff on a field of battle, the two armies would fight each other, and the victorious army would go to nearby towns and often create great tragedy and violence on civilians in the town. So, sexual violence, uh, slaughtering people, pillaging. That was always part of war. And it's part of what makes war so horrific and why I, as a person of faith, and I hope as a decent human being, can't support it.
What's it like seeing the Secretary of War with his Christian iconography tattoos claim the same faith? Would you say it's a different faith altogether?
Well, I'm tempted to say it's a different faith
Yeah.
altogether. Um, what I would say is every religious tradition I know about has expressions that I love and expressions that I really detest.
Hmm.
I don't know about a religious tradition. Maybe the Jains. The Jains seem to be genuinely good people. I'm sure beyond that, I don't know. Um, and I I think Pete Hegseth and Doug Wilson, those people practice a faith that is a manifestation of the worst of Protestant Christianity, in my opinion. I don't, and it's just ignorant. It's you know, celebrating the Crusades. Protestantism is in no way, I mean, it's historically, we're sort of disconnected from the Crusades, but they still want to support, he's got the Crusader imagery, and the Crusaders were extremely violent. There's not a lot of good things I can say about I mean, I can't say anything good about the Crusaders. Uh, so,
Yeah, they didn't even
anyway.
hold Jerusalem for that long. They weren't even good at what they set out to do.
No, they weren't good at it. Well, I wrote a book on Islam, and for that book, I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and I interviewed the Muslim man that has the key to the door of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and he sort of organizes all the different Christian groups that claim that church. And he gave me a tour, and he showed me uh, the sword and spurs of Godfrey of Bouillon, who led the sack of Jerusalem. Oh God, I mean, it's first of all, it's horrific to think about how many people died from that sword or from what that sword was leading. And it's even weirder that it's on display in the Franciscan part of that church. I don't know. It was a painful thing to see. I mean, from historically interesting, but when I thought about it, it kind of depresses me still to think that it's on display as a relic.
Pete Hegseth and his ilk represent a Christian nationalism. Is it fair to say, reading about your travels in the book, that you advocate for sort of Christian internationalism, like an international solidarity and cultural exchange?
Absolutely. I think that one of the best things, one of the best expressions of grace in Christianity today is the international ecumenical movement, where Christians recognize the goodness and the shared faith and the shared humanity across our international borders. And I think that the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches are sort of by design that way. But Protestants have had to learn that, and have had to learn to recognize and reach out to other faith traditions. I think it's a it's definitely an expression of grace. I really feel that as a human being, I am lots of things before I'm an American. I'm a Christian before I'm an American. I'm a human being before I'm an American. I think I'm a human being before I'm a Christian, incidentally. Um, and uh, I'm a dad, and I'm a husband, and I'm a pastor. All these things happen before I'm an American. My allegiances uh, are many, and in a hierarchy of allegiances, being an American is comes behind a lot of other really important things. And I think that's as it should be. I mean, it's good to love our country. It's good to be good. I prefer to say it's good to be a good citizen. I think citizenship is more important than patriotism, but if you want to call it patriotism, that's fine. We need to be good citizens. We need to try to do things like, preserve the environment and preserve the natural wonder and preserve democracy. Yes, all that stuff. Um, and more importantly than that, we need to be good people, and we need to be kind to each other. And I think these things flow into each other, but grace can help us be good people. Grace can help us be kind people, peaceable people. Um, all that is more important, I think, than being a proud American.
What's another example of grace that you think could be a good model?
Oh, do you mean in the world around us?
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think recognizing there's a lot of things that I write about in the book that I think are really important. Um, I think recognizing, I think what grace can help us see true things about ourselves, and that's sometimes hard. Um, I think grace can open our eyes. I mean, one of the things that Jesus says that I love is the truth will set us free, and the grace can speak truth in places where we need freedom. Uh, and that, if we think about our country, for example, um, one of the things that we need to do is understand that um, one of the worst genocides in human history happened in California, and it happened where I grew up specifically. And I didn't know about that till I was in my 40s.
Wow.
Right. Even though I'm very proud of being from Mendocino. This is you're not from the West Coast. Mendocino is a beautiful little town. If you ever saw Murder, She Wrote, that's my hometown. They say it's in Maine, but it's actually my hometown, Mendocino, California. It's beautiful. And the whole county is beautiful. And I'm deeply affected by growing up behind the redwood curtain, we like to say up there. But that area came to the United States through a savage genocide of Native people. And I didn't know about it till I was in my 40s. Grace can help us see those things and try to live better. Um, so I think grace can help us understand that the United States is an empire, and all of the problems with empire that we talked about earlier, things like the the violence and the exploitation and the subjugation, all of that has happened and is happening in the United States, and not just in the territories we hold like Guam or Puerto Rico, though definitely there, but even in California, even in other parts of the United States that are in our what one scholar calls the logo map. Um, the empire's violence is here, and grace can help us see that and help us bring peace to those places.
The book has two appendices that provide practical advice, one of which is on how to become a conscientious objector, and the other, how to become a peace church.
Mhm.
As we wind down, can you tell us a bit about the peace church movement?
Yeah, it's a small but I hope powerful movement within churches that are not aligned with what we call traditional peace churches, which would be the Anabaptists, the Mennonites, the Amish, those people, who, by the way, published my book. So yay for the Anabaptists, yay for the
Yay.
Mennonites. Uh, but also like the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Quakers, they're peace churches. The whole tradition is pacifist. Those of us who aren't in those traditions can work within our congregations to declare our congregations peace churches. And it would work if, with your synagogue or your temple or your mosque, could also be a peace organization or peace congregation. And if you do that, then the folks who might be drafted can cite membership in that congregation as part of the case they would make for themselves to be a conscientious objector. So it's important work, and I hope everybody will read that appendix and check out different ways to become a peace church and a conscientious objector.
Thank you so much. Where can people find your work, find your book?
Oh, this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful. And if anybody wants to buy my book, and I hope you will, I need to sell books so that I can write my next one. So
Yes.
please buy my books anywhere you buy books, whether that's online on Amazon or some other online shop, or better yet, at your locally owned independent bookseller who needs your support. So.
Absolutely. And I can't recommend it enough. I'm excited to use it as an itinerary. I want to travel to all the places you talk about, from Nagasaki to, I have been to Tallinn, which is awesome.
Great. Nice. And if you want it, you can go to my website, bendaniel.org, and you can find a link there to travel photos. I'm a terrible web designer, but I'm a pretty good photographer. So there's some pictures. There's some illustrations you can see.
And an excellent pastor. I'm biased because you're my first pastor I've ever spoken to. So thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you. I really have enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening and or watching War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. Please subscribe, rate and review. Tell your dads. We'll see you next time.